Well, as far as I'm concerned, we've saved the best for last. Yeah, Cal. Cal Thomas and I have been friends for many, many years, too many years to count. He has been an inspiration to me as I have been in and out of government. He's been an encouragement. I don't think I got lots of stuff I could say here, but who doesn't know Cal Thomas? Who's not read a column? Who's not been inspired when they've seen him on television and he is fighting the good fight, when he's standing firm? I know him as a person of character and integrity, a man of faith, a man who loves this country, a man who is not only a friend to me, but a profound friend to the Heritage Foundation. And I am so delighted that you're going to close us out tonight. Thank you, Cal. Show off.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Kay. That's very nice. I told some people who said they were excited that I was speaking tonight that I'm like a blind date. The anticipation's better than the actual event. But I do appreciate the great faith you've demonstrated to me, Kay. Now, before I begin, I want to introduce the light of my life, my fiancée, C.J. Berwick, who is here and whose hand I've been holding under the table this evening. You may have been wondering. It's a great story, soon to be produced on the Hallmark Channel. So, CJ, there you go. And, for somebody to experience this kind of love at my age, we were high school classmates. It just took her 50 years to come back into my life. So, anyway. Now, not many people know this, but when Heritage was looking for a replacement, as if there could be a replacement for Ed Fulner, who, if there's ever going to be another face on Mount Rushmore, it should be him and not Barack Obama. I was consulted. Now, Kay, I don't know if you know this or not, but a number of people called me and asked for my recommendation on who should be the new president of Heritage. And she was number one on my list. And I was, of course, asked, well, why are you so enthusiastic about Kay? I said, because she is most like me. She has intelligence and wisdom, a great sense of humor. She's incredibly good looking. And we are often mistaken for brother and sister. What's not to like? I can't think of a person in the country, at least among conservatives that I know, who is a better selection for this important and I would say critical position than Kay Coles James. You have selected somebody you're going to be proud of if you're not already, who has a tremendous vision not only for Heritage but for the country, who wants to expand the vision of conservatives, at least the stereotype of us, that we're all racist, sexist, homophobes, intolerant bigots, underminers of the Constitution, and Bible-thumping bigots, into something more broad-minded and inclusive. Don't you love the way the left has stolen the language? They don't mean any of it. You know, they talk about inclusion, except when it relates to things in which we believe. They talk about civil rights, except when it comes to poor and minority communities who are trapped in failed government schools. I compare it today to a reversal of Alabama Governor George Wallace, who stood in the schoolhouse door trying to keep African Americans out, to liberal Democrat politicians now who are standing in the schoolhouse door trying to keep African American poor and children in failing schools in. Someone here was so excited he just spilled his water glass. Now here's what I think, and Andrew touched on this earlier, and I'm glad he did because it sounds like we were colluding. To use a word that is in vogue these days. We have the issues on our side. We certainly don't have the media on our side. But we can point to results, not only in our history, but also today. And I think we need to get off the defense. It is the other side, the left, that has failed. Here's an editorial from the last Monday's Wall Street Journal that makes my point better than anything else I could say tonight. The Job Corps Failure is the title of the lead editorial. The U.S. economy is desperately short of skilled workers, and the federal government, claims it wants to help. Also, alas, a new report from the Labor Department's Inspector General shows that the $1.7 billion federal Job Corps training program is a flop. Well, now, it doesn't matter, though, does it? Because, as Ronald Reagan used to say, the only proof of eternal life in Washington is a government program. It's easier to kill a vampire than a government program. It really is. I mean, it has a life of its own. And this is the history of liberalism. Not only does liberalism have a false diagnosis of the human condition, but it's all about feelings. It's not about results. Well, I felt that this was a good thing to do. Yeah, but it's not working. Yes, I know, but it made me feel good. Even my good friend and former Common Ground USA Today colleague Bob Beckel acknowledges now that the AFDC program, the Aid to Families with Dependent Children, which paid women every time, single women, every time they had a baby, was a miserable failure, addicting them to welfare and mortgaging their future. It was about 40 years too late, but, you know, better late than ever. Several years ago, I was in Singapore, and I asked a cab driver, because cab drivers know everything, I said, what's the unemployment rate here in Singapore? He said, under 2%. I looked it up the other day. It still is, about 1.9. I said, how do you do that? He said, well, here in Singapore, we don't have any welfare for able-bodied people. If you don't work, you don't eat, which is kind of biblical for those of you familiar with what the Apostle Paul said. And that's a great motivator to get off your lazy butt and actually go find something. Now, you remember the 1992 Clinton-Gingrich welfare reform measure. The left was saying, oh my goodness, if we reform welfare, if we take people's checks away, there'll be people starving in the streets. Grannies will be thrown out of their homes. I mean, it'll ruin America. It didn't. When people found out that the gravy train wasn't stopping at their mailbox anymore, they went and found work. So this is the history and the legacy of liberalism. It has a false diagnosis of the human condition. Liberals believe that we are just unfortunate creatures, victims, and that only government can solve our problems. Well, if it could, wouldn't it have by now? Their doctrine is a perversion of the 23rd Psalm. The government is my keeper, I shall not want. Yea, though I walk through the valley of the shadow of poverty, the Health and Human Services Department will be there comforting me with food stamps. That's their view. They addict people. They're as bad as the opioid crisis, except their drug is government. They addict people to government. They have no future by being addicted to government, but it doesn't matter to the left because they know they're going to vote mostly for Democrats, because they go into their districts and states and say, now if you don't vote for our guy, then they're going to take your check away. By then, they've been addicted, and breaking an addiction is a very difficult thing. Am I optimistic about the future of America? Reagan was, City on the Hill. His last note to the American people, of course, was that he believed, even after his diagnosis with Alzheimer's, that America's greatest days are ahead. This is certainly my philosophy. It's the philosophy I grew up with. It is, I interviewed a lot of rich and wealthy and successful people as a young reporter. I didn't envy them. I asked them, what's your philosophy of life? Where did you go to school? I might want to be like you someday. But now the attitude is, if you make $2 and I make $1, you owe me 50 cents to make it fair. I wrote a column a few months ago, when the income inequality debate was being thrashed around. And I said, well, I had a deep, dark secret that I never told anybody about until now, but I felt I had to reveal it, just to be honest and transparent. Yes, I suffer from income inequality. Yes, there have always been people making more than I do. But you know what? I don't envy them. This is America. Consistent with my talents and ability to work hard, I can make more money than I'm making now if I want to. So my philosophy of life growing up was inspiration, followed by motivation, followed by perspiration, improves any life. But today we flip that, and it's envy, greed, and entitlement, which improves no life at all. How did we get to that point? How did we get to the point where tenured professors in our colleges and universities, and even in our public schools now, say you're a victim? And if you're a minority person, if you're African American, if you're Hispanic, those evil white people hate you and don't want you in our country. And like Joe Biden said, about conservatives, they want to put you back in slavery. Well, it's actually the other side who wants to keep you in slavery. Now, I'm all for school choice. You know, it's funny that the left is for choice on abortion, but not for choice for those fortunate enough to have been born on where they go to school. This is the key to any future life, a successful life, a good education. But the left wants to trap them in these failed government schools because they're getting money from the teachers' unions, of course, for their political campaigns. I think that's an immorality as great or greater than what the Southern Democrats did in opposition to civil rights and open housing legislation. And by the way, it was Republicans, of course, Everett Dirksen and others, who put those measures through, not people like Richard Russell, whose name is on a Senate office building in Washington, and other Democrats who were or whose forebears were members or founders of the Ku Klux Klan, which Rush Limbaugh regularly points out, which I think is a very good thing. Let's remember where the heritage actually lies on the left. Now, I've just finished this new book, which I'm about to sell. If there are any publishers in the house, see me afterwards. And it's called, the working title is called July 4th, 2026. And I'll tell you why. And Reagan used to say we're only one generation away from losing it all. And while I still think that we, who are associated with heritage and conservative ideas and the idealism of those who went before, have great hope for the future, we have to be careful. We have to be careful, as I think Andrew mentioned at the beginning, that the country that was bequeathed to us, we will be able to pass along in as good or better shape than to the next generation and the one following that. And the signs right now are not very hopeful. And I want to read from you, knowing no higher authority than myself to quote, the introduction to this book, because I think it's very important, especially in our age. You know, the Old Testament prophets warned about what happens to nations that forget God and forget certain principles that made them great. And we need to be reminded of these things within and between generations, lest we fall to the same temptations and fates of those empires that have gone before. So permit me for a moment just to quote from my own introduction, and please hold your applause. In his classic novel, 1984, which I first read at university, published in 1949, George Orwell forecasts life in a totalitarian state with Big Brother watching over its citizens through telescreens, or today we would say CNN. It was a prophecy that did not literally come true, at least not yet, but modern critics of overbearing and overreaching government, including eavesdropping, SWAT teams in virtually every federal department. Did you know that the Department of Agriculture has a SWAT team? What for? Anyway, speed cameras multiplying faster than rabbits. I'm sure some of you have become victims of that. And drones with spying equipment able to tell the government who's attending your backyard barbecue and what you're eating. Now, they might consider America as exhibiting some characteristics of a totalitarian state. There is no money-back guarantee on the United States. There is no certainty this country will continue to exist. There is a pattern to the decline of great nations and empires. The late British diplomat Sir John Glubb wrote about it in an essay published in the last century called The Fate of Empires and Search for Survival. Better known as Glubb Pasha, Sir John was born in 1897 and served in France in the First World War from 1915 to 1918. In 1926, he left the regular army to serve the Iraq government. From 1939 to 1956, he commanded the famous Jordan Arab Legion. After retirement, he published 16 books, chiefly on the Middle East. His historical research and conclusions are the inspiration for the book I've written. And he writes, "The experiences of the human race have been recorded in more or less detail for 4,000 years. If we attempt to study such a period of time in as many countries as possible, we seem to discover the same patterns constantly repeated under widely different conditions of climate, culture, and religion. Surely, we ask ourselves, if we studied calmly and impartially the history of human institutions and development over these 4,000 years, should we not reach conclusions which would assist to solve our problems today? For everything that is occurring around us has happened again and again before." Now, this sounds like a verse from the Old Testament book of Ecclesiastes. What has been will be again. What has been done will be done again. There is nothing new under the sun. Sir John's conclusion is, in fact, the premise of my previous book, which I'm sure you've all read, still available on Amazon.com. What works? Common sense solutions for a stronger America. We have a history. We can learn from the past, not to return to it, but as a lesson for building a better future. Unfortunately, the closest too many of us get to history these days is the instant replay. Thank you, and don't forget to tip your waiters. Sir John asserted we refuse to learn much from history because our studies are brief and prejudiced. He was surprised to learn that the average age of a nation or empire's national greatness is 250 years. This average, he writes, has not varied for 3,000 years. On July 4th, 2026, the United States of America will be 250 years old. What makes us think we will be protected from the fate of other great nations, which often collapsed under the weight of financial debt, moral rot, and military overextension? Doesn't it behoove us who are living in the 21st century to consider how and why great nations have fallen, that we might guard against the same fate for ourselves? Doesn't logic dictate such a step? Sir John found a pattern, or stages, in the rise and fall of great nations, and each of them are included in a brief look at a few empires that fit his analysis. They also fit what appears to be the decline of the United States and the West, and where we might wind up if things are not quickly reversed. Here are his stages for the rise and fall of empires and great nations: the age of pioneers, the age of conquests, the age of commerce, the age of affluence, the age of intellect, the age of decadence. Decadence, he writes, is marked by the following: defensiveness, pessimism, materialism, frivolity, an influx of foreigners, too many, too quickly to be assimilated, the welfare state, a weakening of religion. Decadence is caused by too long a period of wealth and power, selfishness, love of money, the loss of a sense of duty. The life histories of great states are remarkably similar, he writes, and are due to internal factors. Their falls are diverse because they are largely the result of external causes. George Wilhelm Friedrich Hegel's famous line has become a cliche to some, but no less true. We learn from history that we do not learn from history. If America doesn't learn from history, our own and the world's, we are likely to suffer the fate of other great nations, rotting from within before either being conquered from without by an invading army or collapsing under the weight of self-indulgence, decadence, entitlement, greed, and envy. It's up to those of us now living, and the next, and perhaps America's last generation, to turn things around. The late Soviet dictator Nikita Khrushchev once vowed, "We will bury you." Even he didn't foresee that while the Soviet Union would collapse, America might bury itself. Evangelist Billy Graham observed more than a half century ago, America is not at a crossroads, as some say. America is a long way down the wrong road and needs to come back to the crossroads and take the right road. The problem for us modern Americans who have satellite navigation systems in our cars is that we don't know where the right road is, because we've been told by our contemporary version of Orwell's Big Brother, there is no right or wrong, and so we must tolerate everything, because to say no to anything gets you labeled intolerant or worse. It was the late Roman Catholic Bishop Fulton Sheen who said America doesn't suffer from intolerance, as many claim. America suffers from tolerance of everything. It is the height of hypocrisy for those who claim to be tolerant to be intolerant of any view but their own. These are the ones who strictly oppose censorship of any and all ideas, except those with which they disagree. It turns out free speech isn't so free after all. If your speech does not fit with the spirit of the age, you will pay a price. Sometimes it can cost you your job. In some countries, it can cost you your freedom. In a few, you pay the price for speaking out with your life. America is now in stage 1 of this familiar scenario. Canada is toying with stage 2, prosecuting people who say things including in sermons from pulpits of which their government disapproves. What is to prevent America from sliding further toward our own destruction? In my book are some answers to that question. Let's not be like the song Vincent, in which Don McLean sings, "They didn't listen, they're not listening still. Perhaps they never will." Now, on that optimistic note, I'm happy to take any questions, comments. Thank you very much. Thank you. I think we have the lovely Lauren back there with the microphone, who's going to impersonate Phil Donahue and roam around and ask any questions that you may have. Please, no questions from women on how do I find a guy as good as you. So embarrassing. Yes, who is first? Who will speak out? Who will stand up? Well, I thank you very much. I'm not a pessimist, by the way. I do think that the greatest need in the United States now is not a strong economy, although the economy is strong, is not somebody in the White House who really wants to drain the swamp, although the swamp seems to be, exercising certain power. Our major problems, I think, in this country are what they've always been, not economic and political, they're moral and spiritual. And no politician can address morality and spirituality on a political level. That has to come from our Creator, as even Thomas Jefferson acknowledged, though he was hardly a Baptist fundamentalist. And I think that's what our real need is right now. There's a little verse tucked away in the book of Romans, chapter 8, which says, God has built futility into his creation in hope that the creation will turn to him. So we've tried everything else, haven't we? Why not try God?
Well, so I have
Hi.
Cal, hi. It's a pleasure to have you here. Thank you so much for being
you.
here. So I am curious now. So we have, it used to be just in graduate school, and now it's crept down to colleges and high schools and into elementary schools, a complete intolerance to have a reasoned discussion. And you alluded to this. If somebody says something with which the political correct apparatchiks disagree, you are labeled a bigot, homophobe, and worse. How do you begin to tackle that and get this back to a reasoned discussion of ideas?
Great question. Thank you very much. Very simple. Get them out of those schools. Don't send them there in the first place. Now, do we send American troops? Yeah, it's a very easy answer. Do we send American troops to be trained by ISIS? Why would you put your kids, if you're conservative, you're a Christian, or whatever, you believe in certain values and the history and the beauty and wonder of America, why would you put them in an education system that teaches just the opposite? Why? So, I can't afford, as Barbara Bush said, and thanked me for keeping her quote alive at Wellesley College some years ago, the little training program for feminists. She said, men and women, if you have children, they must come first. Our success as a nation, your success as a family, depends less on what happens in the White House than what happens in your house. So if you're going to have kids, grandchildren, this is not philosophy with me. I'm paying a lot of money on private schools for my children and grandchildren. A lot of money. But it's an investment. I'm not going to put them in the enemy's camp where they learn their material and energy shaped by pure chance in a random universe. The reason they like bananas on their cereal is that their nearest relative is down at the zoo. Why would I put them in a school like that? Why would you do that? Well, they have a great athletic program. Oh, please. So get them out. Come out from among them and be separate. Support good, conservative, faith-based schools where they'll learn not just how to make a living, but how to live. That's why I'm announcing my candidacy tonight. No, I'm not. Yes, sir. Hi.
So Vince Colber here from Chicago and Wellington, Florida. So my question is, why is it that we can't get the media to focus on the correct bad news?
The correct bad news? I thought you were going to say the correct good news. Yeah.
Because bad news does sell.
Yeah, of course. Well, it's like the political commercials. People complain every election cycle. They hate the negative commercials, but they work, or they wouldn't use them. Look, I think we need to take a different approach to the media. People say, meaning me, how did you become successful in the media that's hostile to your political point of view, that's hostile to your faith and whatever? Very simply, I made friends with them. I joined the groups that they joined. I grew up with them. I started as a copy boy at NBC News in Washington. I knew some of the greatest journalists I've ever worked with. And I think you don't take it as a fait accompli that what is collectively known as the media has to be the way it is forever. The other thing I would say is support people like me who are in the media and conservatives and the rest. Write letters to the editor of the newspapers in which my column appears. If you're in a paper that has unfortunately, if you're in an area where a paper has unfortunately not seen the light yet, write the publisher and the editor and ask them to start carrying me. And if you don't subscribe to the paper, and this is how I built the column in the first place, tell them you will subscribe if they take me. You're not asking for fairness and balance, you're asking for the bottom line, you see, and that publishers respond to that. This is what I did when I used to go out and speak to conservative groups, and I still do. I say, how many people subscribe to your local paper? And usually fewer than half raise their hands. This was 20, 30 years ago. And I said, well, how many would subscribe if my column was in it? Every hand went up. I said, okay, in the morning, you call the publisher, not the editor, call the publisher who controls the purse strings, and say, if you take Thomas, I'll subscribe to your paper. So we appeal to them on an economic basis, not on a fair and balanced basis. So there's a way to overcome the bias, and you hit them in the pocketbook, but from a pot. No, I don't like boycotts, you know. First of all, it's sexist. How come there are no girl cots? I don't know. Another question. I don't know. Where did that come from? Just came out. You know. So you know, support the good. We all know what we're against. Let's support what we're for. Light overcomes darkness. Good overcomes evil. Positive overcomes negative. Jack Kemp used to say that you don't overcome a thesis with an antithesis, you overcome it with a better thesis. So let the left say, we shall overcome. We're going to show them how to overcome by telling America's story, okay? Who else? Yes, sir.
Hello, Mr. Thomas. I'm John Raese from Charleston, South Carolina, where the battle for states' rights and the War of Northern Aggression started.
You know, you sound like one of those guys on the convention floor at the ballet. From the great state of South Carolina, where people come to eat grits with red-eye gravy, cast 14 votes for the next president of the United States. Yes, sir, go right ahead.
Well, now that you mention it, where Mick Mulvaney and Nikki Haley hail from.
I love Nikki Haley. I'd vote for her for president in a minute. I think she's really cool.
So I read that Karl Marx said that the way we don't need to attack America, we will destroy the apple from within. He also said that we will inundate the society with what is abnormal until everybody thinks it's normal. The genie's already out of the bottle. How do we get it back?
How about building a better bottle? You know, I mean, if you look throughout history, you look at the Gilded Age, you look at the era of slavery, you look at throughout history, not only the United States, but of the world. The normal condition of humanity is not democracy, freedom of thought, women's rights, religious tolerance and freedom and pluralism, freedom of the press. That we are abnormal. Most of the world is full of dictators, religious fundamentalists, you know, go right down the line, censorship, everything else. This is why we need to renew it within every generation. So I think we need to start small. Now, if you're a reader of Scripture, as I am, you look and you see that the power of God is unleashed not in big stuff, not in full stadiums, not in TV and all the rest, but in small things, weak things, last place at the table, mustard seed, washing of feet. When I'm weak, then I'm strong. Humble yourself under the mighty hand of God, and he will exalt you in due time if you faint not. Those who wait upon the Lord shall renew their strength, mount up with wings as eagles, run and not be weary, walk and not faint. Can we take up the offering now? I mean, we're focusing on big stuff that doesn't really work. Trickle-down morality from politicians who can't impose it upon themselves, that you may have noticed. Let's start with the small stuff. If you're pro-life, let's associate with a local pregnancy help center that really is on the ground helping women in difficult circumstances. And let's start telling America's story. And this is one of the reasons Paul Harvey was so popular for so many years, his rest of the story. Horatio Alger stories, people who were born on the wrong side of the tracks, grew up in a family with an absent father, an alcoholic mother, or whatever, the horrible conditions. And yet, Ben Carson, perfect example, his story. And yet, by embracing certain principles, the principles in which we believe, elevated themselves into becoming self-sustaining and a credit to their family and to their country. These are the stories we used to tell. These were America's stories, but we don't tell them anymore. We tell stories of victims and people who can't overcome and all this other business, So I think you start small in your own community, and the collective effort of that gives you a bubble-up morality that hopefully eventually will affect Washington. But if you're putting your trust in princes and kings, as King David, who was quoted earlier, I think, said not to do, you're going to be constantly frustrated and disappointed, because the answer isn't in Washington, it's in the human heart. And that's where we can have effect. All right, now look, because of the EEOC regulations, we have to get some questions from women here. So yes, ma'am, right over here.
So
Hi.
here I am.
How are you?
First of all, you are.
What is your name?
Bobby.
No, don't worry, I'm not with the FBI.
No, my name is my name is Bobby.
Bobby.
Bobby Hasler.
Very good.
Yes.
Yeah, and you're identifying as a woman tonight, right?
No,
You're free to,
I'm
Facebook
identifying
has
as
57
a
gender
conservative.
identifications. Now, go right ahead, Bobby.
Okay. In 2016, we dodged the freight train, if you will, of progressivism, but when Hillary Clinton was defeated.
Yes.
And the unlikely person that is leading us into the future is a man that, who would have expected it? But I think he's doing a terrific job, and I wonder if you feel like Donald Trump is possibly the person that could lead us back toward the right turn.
Well, the thing about a leader is that the leader can't go where the people don't want to go. And I like many of his policies, I really do. And I interviewed him in 2016 in his Trump Tower in New York, and it was interesting. But I just wish, I wish he'd stop some of the tweeting. I understand why he's doing it, and I wish he'd stop some of the condemnation. I don't like condemning other people, especially fellow Americans. It goes back to the Jack Kemp philosophy, and I just think it's not helpful to an agenda I think most of us believe in this room, and obviously the people who voted for him believe in. It's just unnecessary. But, if the choice is between him and Hillary Clinton, it's not much of a choice. Frankly, I hope she runs again. And, and that she picks Bernie Sanders as her vice presidential candidate. I think that would be the ideal ticket. I really do. So anyway, we got another woman here. Yes, we'll take one more and then we'll stop.
Ready?
Thank you. You're not a woman, but well, at least I don't think so.
Well, that depends on what I choose to be
Yeah,
today.
that's true. Who am I to judge?
My name is John Rumpel. I
Hi, John.
understand earlier that you said that you should take your children out of the public school system and put them in a private school system. Is that correct?
That is correct. Thank you for listening.
Well, that's good. Every now and then I try.
Yeah.
But I kind of think that's a little bit wrong, because what you're asking me to do is support the public school system, which is creating this corrupt society, and then go spend my money to put them in a private school system.
Well, how much are your children worth to you? Look, the answer to that is school choice, and have the tax dollars follow wherever you choose to send your children or grandchildren.
How about just fighting the public school system
It's a wasted effort. The
through
left-
lawsuits, and it's not a wasted effort that way?
Well, I go back to, not only personal experience. When my youngest son was in the 4th grade, we got a letter home from the public elementary school inviting parents to a meeting to discuss the growing drug problem in the elementary school, 4th grade. And I said, well, if I have to bag groceries at night at the local supermarket just to keep them out of this place, I'm going to do it. I mean, we've tried for years, haven't we, with lobbying and everything else to try to reform government schools, and it simply gets worse and worse, especially for poor and minority kids. And I think we ought to be on their side. Conservatives have the message for poor and minority children. The left has failed them miserably. One of the things Trump said during the 2016 campaign, which I thought was fantastic, he was addressing an African-American audience and said, look, you've been voting for these other clowns for 40 years. What have they done for you? What did Barack Obama do for the African American community in America? Zero. Less than zero. I defy anybody to tell me what he did to elevate any poor African American child or family, or put a family together, or put it back together. I'm in Washington. I've lived there most of my life, though I'm moving to Florida. And I don't see it. We have the message. And I just don't see putting our dearest children and grandchildren in effectively the enemy camp, where they're taught the kinds of things 5 days a week that are the direct antithesis of what we believe. And then we think we're going to get them on the weekends or take them to church and Sunday school, and somehow we're going to counteract that. And believe me, you don't know some of the stuff that's being taught. I mean, they have these teachers' conventions, and one of the things over the past that they've talked about is how to teach things or how to get things in the school without the parents knowing about it. And you're hearing candidates now running for office. I heard a commercial the other day, a political commercial, pre-K. They want to get them before kindergarten. Your job is to have them, and then to turn them over to the state to raise them intellectually and morally. Are you comfortable with that? Fine, if you are, but I'm not. And again, I refer you to Barbara Bush. The kids have got to come first. Matters more what happens in your house than what happens in the White House. Listen, thanks for your kind attention. I appreciate it. God bless.